Hey guys, Poro here with another MSI 2025 video, this time for my post-tournament reflections. I'm going to go over a lot of things here, including my player rankings before and after the tournament, my team rankings, how my draft meta read was, my predictions, and my overall tournament MVP. First off really quickly, the tournament format. I just want to go out of my way to say that this is the second best tournament format we've ever had in my opinion, right behind IPL5. Double elimination is significantly superior to single elimination for me, and it's really telling to me that a lot of people were able to have perfect or near perfect predictions. The MSI format is much better than the Worlds format at actually determining who the best team in the world is. The teams who are supposed to win will win more often, and I think this is a good thing. The goal of a tournament is to figure out how good every team is after all. Fearless Draft has had a positive impact. There are negatives as well, but overall the positives shone through. The one big drawback to Fearless Draft is the lack of depth and storylines within an individual series. Some of the greatest series of all time happened because of non-Fearless Draft. Faker picking Galio 5 times in a row against RNG in Worlds 2017 semifinals, Crown shutting down Faker with 3 Malzahar games, the list goes on. The best example of this would be the DRX 2022 Worlds run. If we had Fearless Draft, this historically fan-favorite run would never have happened. For those who don't remember or didn't realize at the time, DRX won Worlds 2022 not out of luck, or even necessarily skill, but because they had a significantly better meta read than every other team. DRX, and most likely Barrel specifically, realized that the meta was in a great spot for double-ranged oppressive 2v2 bot lanes. Their favorite go-to combo was Ashe Heimerdinger. The other teams refused to respect it because it was viewed as a gimmick pocket pick, and many of the series would feature teams not banning it and trying to play what was perceived as meta into it at the time, or going for crazy counterpicks that would never work. By the time teams finally decided to ban one or both, it was too late. After Worlds 2022 ended, we saw the Spring 2023 meta instantly revolve solely around ranged supports. This was the Ashe, Kalista, Jhin, Caitlyn, Varus support meta, which was exactly the style that DRX was using. Even though their players were weaker overall, the style DRX went for with oppressive bot-side pressure, and the fact that the meta was great for King and Azeka's champion pools, was in my opinion the biggest reason why they won. Super great meta read from them, way ahead of their time. Now, imagine if we had Fearless. We get King and Aatrox once, Zeka plays Sylas and Akali, and then what? Ashe Heimerdinger game 1 and to lose everything? DRX never wins in a Fearless format. That's the big negative, now for the multiple huge positives. For one, we did get slightly more champion diversity. We went from around 80 champions picked last MSI to over 100 this time. Now I know what you're thinking, that doesn't seem like that large of a change. But now, consider this. At MSI 2024, Cassante was picked 51 times, Kalista 47 times, and Varus 36 times. At MSI 2025, the most picked champion was Rel at just 18. Maybe we didn't get double the champions like some people were hoping, but we did get a significantly better spread of champions that led to way more unique drafts across the board. The other huge positive from this format is that it eases a lot of pressure off of Riot to actually skew balance changes in favor of pro play. I would say there were a lot of broken champions at this tournament. Annie, Varus, Pantheon, Talia, these champions were definitely pick or ban type of threats. That said, it never actually felt like any of these picks were oppressive, because you could only pick it once. Pantheon is a middle-of-the-pack jungler in solo queue right now. Imagine a world where he has to get gutted significantly because of pro play in a world without Fearless, versus now, where we get to keep him being relatively balanced for the masses, while he has only a minimal influence on pro despite being broken there. This is a huge benefit of Fearless that keeps the game healthier for everyone. I hope Riot sticks with Fearless for the foreseeable future, despite that big downside that I'll definitely miss. Next up, let's talk predictions. I didn't do quite as well as I would have liked, but it was decent overall. I went 17 for 19 in series winner, missing the Gam Furia match and the T1 Gen G Grand Finals match. In hindsight though, I don't think I would change either prediction, and I'm not too upset those were the two I missed. For game score, I was only 9 out of 19, which is kind of sad. That score is further bolstered by the crazy 5 for 5 streak I had at the end of the tournament, but it was truly pathetic before that. Game score has always been a weird one for me. I feel like most people just take how close the two teams are to each other and predict like that. Oh, this team is way stronger, so it's a 3-0, or oh, these teams are roughly the same strength, 3-2. However, for me, I refuse to actually give a team a game unless I can realistically come up with a strategy for how the losing team could actually win. For example, I predicted 3-1 for Fly versus G2, because I thought G2 could win one game with a Maokai comp and then they would lose everything else, or I predicted BLG 3-2 against Fly because I thought Fly would win if they escaped early game even, but I didn't think they could do it consistently. As such, you'll notice that I tend to predict an unusually high amount of 3-0s, which of course almost never ends up being the reality. I thought BLG would 3-0 MKOI because in my head, BLG hit both top esports and IG with 3-0s, and I didn't see how MKOI could come up with a game plan any better than those two teams, but of course, the series ended up almost going to 5 games. 9 out of 19 isn't that horrible though, so I'll take it. And finally, we have the who did I want to win score, which I got a 10 out of 19 on, which is fine. Last MSI, I had 14 out of 24, so technically this one was a bit worse, but I still had fun overall. Okay, teams and players time. Let's do top laners first. Before the tournament, I had, in order, Doran, Keen, and Flandre in S tier, Bin in A tier, Broken Blade and Driver in B tier, and Whippo, Merwin, Kiaya, Rest, and Gigo in C tier. I had no D tier or F tier top laners. I would say I did okay with this tier list overall, but I had some big misses. Here's what my top lane tier list would look like after the tournament concluded. The first thing that should stick out is my lack of S tier top laners. I thought Keen was the best, followed by Flandre and then Doran, but I thought they were all A tier. Doran is self-explanatory, he has some big pop-off games, but also had his fair share of stinkers and a weak grand finals overall. Flandre and Keen were both somewhat similar in my opinion, flipping somewhere between good and great over the course of their series. I was not overly impressed by any top laners' showings here though. I felt like neither of them stepped up in huge moments where someone on their team needed to step up. Keen is definitely closer to Flandre to S tier though. He had some great games and was overall probably the most consistent member on Gen G. However, he did have his fair share of mistakes too. More rotation mistakes and bad teamfights than I would have expected from someone like Keen at least. As for Flandre, I think he played about as well as I was expecting, and maybe I just overestimated top lane as a role overall. I dropped Bin to B tier as I was not impressed with him at all. I kept waiting for his pop-off carry performance, but it just never came. If anything, Bin had a fuck ton of bad ints that lost his team winnable games. It was definitely his weakest international showing in a long time, maybe ever. Speaking of B tier changes, I actually decided to bring Whippo up. I thought he was overall the best overperformer in the top lane category, and I was pleasantly surprised with how much pressure he was exerting in games. Of course, he's always been good at this kind of thing, but I just wasn't expecting to see it against the likes of AL and BLG. He had his classic Whippo ints, but not enough for me to drop him at all. I also had Driver in B tier as well. He looked basically exactly how I was hoping he would, and I'm glad he had a good tournament. Merwin, Broken Blade, Kiaya, Rest, and Gigo are all in C tier for me. I thought every top laner performed well enough that none of them are D tier contenders. Merwin was fine this tournament, nothing too offensive in either direction. At the complete opposite end of the spectrum, we have Broken Blade. He was absolutely terrible in his first series against Furia, and I think a lot of people will leave with horrible impressions from that, but I want to give credit where it's due and say that BB did look much better in every other series. Not great by any means, but he certainly wasn't horribly inting, and he had a few really solid games. Kiaya was also pretty solid, but he was no better than Broken Blade in play-ins by the end of it. Then we have the Rest Gigo conundrum. With pure gut impulse, I think most people would want to put Rest dead last. He looked anywhere from mediocre to bad in all of his games, whereas Gigo had some great performances against G2. The main factor for me here is strength of opponents. Gigo looked good against G2 and okay against GAM. Rest looked either okay or bad against T1 and AO. I've seen Rest play internationally before, and he's been domestic for almost a decade now. I know what he can do and how good he is, and I'm pretty confident that he would have also looked fine against play-in teams Furia played against. I'm also pretty confident that Gigo would have looked just as terrible in the face of Doran or Flandre, if not worse, due to the likelihood that he would have probably gone for much more volatile lane matchups. Essentially, I'm crediting Gigo for his good performance against G2 and limiting him to C because of his showing against Scam, whereas I'm giving Rest benefit of the doubt due to his past results and the opponents he had to deal with. Moving on to jungle, before the tournament started, I had Tarzan, Owner, and Canyon in S, Inspired and Skuband in A, Beichuan, Elyoya, and Junjia in B, and Levi and Tado in C. Once again, I had no D or F tier junglers. This is what my jungle player tier list would look like after the conclusion of the tournament, and I definitely had my biggest miss here. We'll go top down again. I was extremely impressed with how the junglers showed up at this tournament. I thought Tarzan was easily the best jungler here, but Owner played more than well enough to also deserve S tier. Both of them had some insane games where they were solo carrying their team. The big surprise for me is my inclusion of Inspired into S tier. I had my doubts, as Inspired has been a domestic stomper for a while now, but hasn't had the greatest track record internationally. His MSI last year was pretty mediocre, and his Worlds last year was fine but not special. This MSI was great. Specifically, I was unbelievably impressed with his series against BLG, and thought he was the best player out of the 10 by a significant margin. Next up, we've got Canyon, who I booted down a tier. Canyon was way more inconsistent than I would have liked. The biggest defender for me would have been the first series against T1, where I really feel like he did not show up. One of the unfortunate factors for me was that I felt like Canyon never looked good in any of Gen G's losses. Anytime they dropped a game, it felt like Canyon either did nothing or rolled over and died. He also had 2 pretty bad Nidalee games where he ended up just winning both because his team was going crazy. Canyon did have his fair share of great games as well though, so it's not like I'm dropping him any lower or anything. The other A tier inclusion here is Junjia, who has always been a great international riser. This time though, I really feel like he hit another gear. I don't actually think he's the best player in LCP or anything, as a lot of people say, but he's definitely at minimum top 3 and easily the best jungler in the region. Then we've got Elyoya in B, and I thought he had some weak games and some strong games, but overall thought he was fine. He and Alvaro were the 2 biggest bright spots for me on the MKOI roster, and I think they'll be pretty solid heading into LEC Summer. Now we get into some of the big droppers, Beichuan and Skewmond. I knew Beichuan wasn't going to hold up, but I didn't think it would be this bad. There were so many BLG wins where he was playing bad enough that he could have lost his team the game, and he was definitely the player with the most egregiously horrible games. That said, I'm not actually terribly disappointed in Beichuan. I like his mindset a lot. He's a very aggressive player who's willing to limit test to get his team leads. He did a very good job at getting his lanes ahead early, and a player who's willing to pull the trigger confidently is a better base to build off of than a player who does nothing, and Beichuan is certainly not a player who does nothing. My personal hope is that BLG will actually keep Beichuan and try to improve their synergy with him for summer, whereas I know the popular opinion is that he needs to be replaced. Bad tournament from Beichuan, but bad in a very specific way that makes me still think he can improve. On the opposite side of the coin, my biggest miss of the tournament, Skewmond. I knew Skew was a pretty passive player, but I wanted to give him credit for his domestic consistency as well as his mechanics. A reminder for everyone that Skewmond was one of, if not the first players globally who was popping off on Pantheon jungle this split, and I think he's a big reason as to why the pick got so popular. I was optimistically hoping he would bring that type of energy to this tournament and use it as a stepping stone to have a big performance jump, similar to what Yike did at MSI 2023. What I realized during the tournament is that Skewmond has a lot of stuff he needs to figure out to be integrated into the G2 system. The way Broken Blade and Caps want to play the game seems to be at odds with what Skewmond does, and a lot of G2's games end up feeling very AFK as a result where they just slowly burn resources. I get that Skewmond is young and a rookie, so I don't want to make any sweeping generalizations yet, but G2 really needs to figure out what style of game they want to play, and that choice will fundamentally come down to whether Skew can figure out that question for himself. Then we have Levi and Taru, who both performed roughly where I thought they would. I liked watching Taru a lot, and I think he has a lot of room to grow, but in all fairness, the jungle pool at this tournament is pretty elite, and I don't think it's a bad look to be last tier, especially in C tier. Levi did what Levi always does. He was fine but nothing super special, and he's probably not going to improve much more. Give it a few months and I wouldn't be surprised to see Taru at the top of C or even in B tier. Moving into mid lane, this was my list beforehand. Chovy and Solo S, Shanks, Knight and Faker in A, Jojo and Quad in B, Caps in his own weird B- tier, Hongq and Toots in C, and Emo and Aris in D. I only had Emo on my initial mid tier list, but I did make it pretty clear that Emo looked better domestically. Moving into post-tournament, here's what I have. Again, like top lane, I've got no S-tier mid laners. We can go over these top 4 pretty quickly. Shanks, Knight, and Faker all looked about how I thought they would look. We saw Faker have his laning woes, but solid mid and late games with a few clutch pop-off moments. We saw Knight play below his expected past level, but still be the best player on his team. And we saw Shanks be able to show off his unique playstyle with many great moments. However, I think Chovy was underperforming all tournament until Grand Finals. Now, when I say Chovy was underperforming, I need to put into context that I think an underperforming Chovy is still one of the best mid laners in the world. That said, he never looked as dominant at this tournament as he did during his highs domestically in spring, and I really don't think the gap between him and the other mid laners was all that big. I also think Shanks clearly has a lot of flaws in his game that stop him from being a true S tier, which means that even though I think Chovy was the best mid, it was by a small enough margin that I'm putting them all in A. Next up, we've got a slew of B tiers, and at the top of that list I have Hongq. I don't take back anything I said about Hongq prior to the tournament. He makes a lot of very basic mistakes and sometimes crumbles in big moments under pressure. That said, when he wasn't doing either of those things, he looked great. His baseline laning was way better than I thought it would be. I remember him being mega lane gapped by Fofo in playoffs, and while I do think Fofo is super underrated, I figured that would mean Hongq's laning would be a step below everyone else. Turns out this just means Fofo still got it, as Hongq's laning looked fine against every team he played against, which included T1 and AL. He also showed a huge level of confidence that I love to see from a young player like him, and his performance overall proved 2 things to me. 1, he's got potential to be one of the LCP greats, and 2, LCP is just a better overall region than I thought. I watched a lot of LCP and still hesitantly thought they would be worse than LEC, but it turns out I just overestimated LEC at the end of the day. Speaking of LEC, we've got Caps and Jojo next. Caps was definitely the best player on G2 and had his fair share of solid games. He also had a few bad games, but I want to emphasize that Caps definitely stepped up better at MSI than he did domestically. As for Jojo, he didn't look quite as good as I was hoping, but he was by no means bad, and I think bottom of B tier is more than reasonable for him. Also in B tier I have Toots, who pleasantly surprised me. Toots was very sink or swim domestically, and I was expecting him to have a few good games and a few really bad ones. What I got instead was Toots stepping it up and being the best player on his team even in their losses. I've never seen him be this reliable before, and I'm hoping he takes this momentum back to LTA South to be way more consistent and solidify his spot as best domestic mid laner. Below Toots, and a huge underperformer, was Quad. Man, I have no idea what happened. Quad just did not look good at all this tournament. He had no standout games and plenty of bad ones. His Annie was never good ever, and it felt like he just couldn't figure his shit out. It's a shame as he was the most consistent mid laner domestically as well. Definitely the worst performer on Fly at the tournament. Then in D tier I have Ares and Emo, which I would imagine most people would agree with. Gam's clear weakness was the lack of a solid mid laner, and they were constantly exploited there regardless of who they played. I thought Ares looked a bit better though, as Emo definitely looked worse here than he did domestically. Next we go to bot, and here was my list before. Guma and Hope in S, Elk and Ruler in A, Doggo, Masu, Suba and Hans in B, and Ayu and Artemis in C. Like top and jungle, no D or F tier bots. My list looks like this post MSI. Once again, we have no S tiers. At the top of my list I have Guma and Ruler, and I thought they were definitively the two best. Guma is at the top for me because he was by far the most consistent of the bunch from start to finish. It's really remarkable to me that he could have such a good international tournament after such a turbulent split, but here we are. That said, I don't think Guma was allowed to be put into a position where he needed to step up and be a huge carry for the team. Guma isn't great at Kai'Sa and Ezreal, so T1 had to spend the entire tournament picking neither, despite both being top meta threats. Instead, they had to opt for lower tier picks like Jhin and Corki more frequently. That said, Guma did have some very solid performances on those champs. I still think though that his ceiling for this tournament was not the highest we've seen from him. Ruler, on the other hand, certainly had an S tier ceiling. By the back half of the tournament, he was playing amazingly, similarly to how he played in his prime JDG years. Before that though, it was sketchy. In the first two series, he was heavily plagued by the same issues he's had all year, having weak lane phases and being caught out at bad times. A great second half of the tournament for him, but I can't put him above Guma, who was way more consistent from start to finish, and who also had a strong tournament finish. Then below them, I decided to make a special B+ tier where I'm putting Hope and Elk. I think they were definitely a tier below Guma and Ruler, but I can't put them in the same tier as the other Western ADCs. Hope's tournament was up and down for sure. He was easily by far the best Lucian and Kai'Sa at the tournament, but he had a lot of champions he didn't look elite on either. If he wasn't on one of his specialty picks, he looked more like a stock standard solid bot laner and not much else. Elk for me just didn't look as good as I was hoping across the board. He was good but not great in many of his games, and didn't look anywhere near like he did at prior internationals. Below this, I have Doggo. People have been putting Doggo into conversations he does not belong in. I saw Twitter threads saying Doggo is one of the best bot laners in the world, and I promise you he is definitely not. That said, he had a great MSI where he played to his ceiling. I think he benefits a lot from the fact that the other bot laners were underperforming across the board, and his own team was stepping up above their usual level of play. For example, I give Doggo basically no credit for his 12-0 Caitlyn game with the pentakill. I thought he was backpacking for sure, and if anything, I thought he almost threw the game at the pentakill dragon standoff with his positioning, if not for the Junjia pillar clutch on the Galio ult. Below that, I have Masu and Supa. I think Masu looked really good sometimes, but also had some crazy ints like his level 1 positioning against BLG in Game 5, or the numerous times he got duo killed in early lane phase. Very basic mistakes, but he also showed his talents as well. As for Supa, I thought he was fine, but outclassed by the other teams. BLG was practically abusing bot side for example after identifying that MKOI's bot lane have a weak lane phase. In C tier, I have Hans first. Hans is the closest to B, but I really can't get over the fact that it feels like he has just not improved at all ever since his initial split with G2. Hans is a very passive player when he has a lead, which makes it hard to win games through bot side. I get that the LEC bot lane pool is a bit more pinched than other regions, but I was not impressed with his performances at this tournament compared to last year where he showed up big occasionally like against top esports. Below that, I have Artemis, who I thought played fine around his expected level, and then below that, but still in C tier, I have Ayu. I was a little disappointed in Ayu. I have higher expectations of him than most, and was hoping this would be a nice breakout tournament for him, and he did showcase a lot of his strengths mechanically and with his champion pool depth, but it was also clear that he was one of, if not the weakest member on the Furia lineup this time around. Then we have supports. Before MSI, I had Kael, Keria, and On in S tier, Duro in A tier, Alvaro, Busio, and Labrov in B tier, Jojo and Kaiwing in C tier, and Elio in D tier. After MSI, it looks like this. Keria was simply fantastic all tournament, and I think he, along with Owner, were easily the two best players on the T1 squad. I do think Keria had a weaker Grand Finals overall despite the great Renata game, but apart from that, he was definitely a huge reason as to why T1 made it as far as they did. Under that, I have Duro, who played really well for what it's worth. I'm still not convinced he's at a true elite level yet, as I feel like he was the worst member on his team for many of their games, but he also had some great performances, such as his Blitzcrank against AL. I got everything I wanted from Duro, and I think he can do well in LCK this summer. Then I have Kyle, who I thought looked fine, but underperformed overall. He was making a lot of uncharacteristic mistakes that I didn't see from him domestically, and I felt like he was never a true 1v9 threat. Busio is also in A tier for me surprisingly, as I felt as though he was either matching or better than every support he played, roughly the same level against Kyle, and clearly better than On and Lebrov. He was one of the better ranged support players, piloting Bard and Karma very well for example. At the top of B tier, I have Alvaro, who played some of the best mid games from an engaged support I've seen. There were so many games where MKoi looked lost, and Alvaro was able to continue to find crazy play after crazy play to keep them within winnable distance. MKoi definitely had issues in the 2v2 laning department though, so I have to dock Alvaro for that. The biggest support underperformer was On, who had a disastrous tournament for his standards. He was fine in play-ins, but at a certain point he just started brutally running it down against both T1 and FlyQuest, taking easily won games and turning them into close bangers that should have never existed. I'm extremely disappointed in On, who had been pretty consistent all year, only to do that at MSI. In C tier, I have Jojo, Lebrov, and Kaiwing. Jojo impressed me a lot. I knew his champion pool was deep, but I wasn't expecting him to have such a great success in play-ins across so many different styles. His Leona game against Gam was one of the cleanest support 1v9s I've seen in a while, regardless of strength of opponent, and he showed up on picks like Seraphine as well. He also did have his fair share of weak games though, such as the classic engage fails and uninspiring losses. Lebrov didn't look good, although nobody looked good on G2 except for Caps, and Kaiwing showed he can play solid sometimes, but also had way more engaged support incidents than anyone else at the tournament did. He solo lost CFO Game 1 against T1, and never truly felt consistent or reliable at any moment. Then last we have Elio, who I still think is a step below other supports even when at his best, and too inconsistent to ever be at his best reliably. Both Kaiwing and Elio also get docked for having their champion pools exploited to a degree. Finally, we have teams, and there's not much to say here as the MSI format does a pretty solid job at sorting everyone out anyway. I predictably have MKoi over G2, and while more contestable, I decided to put Fly over CFO. Every other spot had a predetermined ranking. I was hoping G2 would show up more, and I didn't realize the LEC was so weak, but other than that, I had everything reasonably correct on the team's front, I would say. Before we move on to draft, I'll get the Poro player awards out of the way real quick. My first, second, and third team All-Pros should be pretty self-explanatory as they would just be my top 3 players per role, and my overall tournament MVP is going to go to Keria. I don't think anyone on Gen G was playing at a high enough level consistently enough to get it, and Keria was a beast in basically every series. He's the only player in his role across the board who I can confidently say was a step above everyone else, and I thought he was the best player in every single T1 series win. For Finals MVP, I'm going with Chovy, although anyone who saw my Finals recap would know that. Chovy only had one weak game in Finals, with the rest of the games being exactly what you would want from him, and he looked way better at the last possible moment than he did for the rest of the tournament. For draft, I want to rebuild all of my tier lists real quick, so I think it would be better for me to switch to the other Poro to do that one. Okay, we're gonna knock this out real quick. Before MSI started, I took a look at the patch notes for 15.12 and 15.13, which were the patches that hit right before MSI. And with those patch notes, plus what all of the regions have been doing domestically, I made tier lists for each role based on what champions I thought we would see at MSI and what champions would be the strongest there. If you want to see more of my reasonings for making these tier lists and what I thought about individual champions, you can take a look at my draft video. I posted it right after my MSI 2025 breakdown video, so those are there, but all of these tier lists are from that video. So here's top, jungle, mid, bot, support. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at them, and now that we have finished the tournament, I'm going to move some things around based on what I thought afterwards. And I was taking a look at these, and for the most part, I actually think they were pretty good. I was not super confident heading into the tournament because I've never been the best at being able to tell what patch note changes will actually affect what, but I think that overall, I didn't do half bad. So top lane in very strong, I had Rumble, Ambessa, Scion, Ornn, Jax, and Yorick. And then in good pick, I had Aatrox, Nidalee, Camille, Renekton, Gwen, Cho'Gath, Galio, and Jace. I think having Rumble as the top pick was fine. I would still agree with this. I would probably want to move Ambessa back a little bit, so I could see something like putting her around here. I did think Scion was strong. We didn't see much Ornn, but I'm still pretty sure that Ornn is very good. I had Aatrox at the top of good pick because of the buffs that he received. You know, honestly, now that I'm looking at it a little bit closer, it feels a little bit weird to have some of these champions in the same tier as Rumble, so I think I will actually move Rumble up to meta-defining. I don't, like, think that Rumble was super meta-defining or anything, but I do think he was a tier above champions like Jax and Yorick for sure. Nidalee top was not picked a single time in this tournament, but I swear on my life, I still think Nidalee top is a very strong pick, and I'm actually surprised that we didn't see it. To be fair, a lot of the best Nidalee top players did not end up making it to this tournament. Doran can't play it, Bin was never that good at it, Flandre can't play it, so I'm not like too surprised that we didn't see it. If HLE had made it, or if IG had made it, maybe we would have gotten more Nidalee top. Camille being here, I'm not so sure about this. I think I would probably do something like move Renekton here and then Gwen there. I thought that we pretty much never saw Cho'Gath, unfortunately. I think we maybe saw it like once or twice, and it looked fine. Galio top was here solely as an answer to Rumble, and I think it did that just fine. I don't think it was like crazy oppressive or anything. Jace was used to... Okay, so there were some games where Jace was picked into tanks and then ended the game with like a 5k gold lead or something. But in all of the games that this happened in, it was a top tier team picking Jace into a lower tier team's tank. Like we had like Doran picking Jace into Rest's Ornn and then destroying the Ornn. It's like obviously Doran Jace is going to destroy Rest Ornn, you know? So I don't actually think that Jace is like all that, or that Ornn is like that weak or something. So I would leave all of this as is. Moving down to playable, I had Aurora, Gnar. We never actually saw Aurora top. I still think it's fine, but I actually do think that Gnar ended up being a better answer into a lot of the champions than I thought it would be, so we'll move Gnar up. Cassante I was not impressed with. We did end up seeing some Shen. I thought it was fine. We saw maybe like one game of Poppy top from Keen. It looked fine. Twisted Fate top, I was thinking because they buffed his E, I was thinking maybe Twisted Fate top could come back and be viable, but we never saw it, so I can't really make a judgment call on that. Mundo, Swain, Volibear, stuff like this we never saw. Gragas looked a lot more useful than I thought it was going to look. I'm actually going to move Gragas up to good pick. I think I was expecting Gragas to struggle a little bit because it does not have a great matchup into, like, for example, Aatrox, who was buffed. So I was thinking, you know, like, if Aatrox ever gets buffed, that's a Gragas nerf, and we weren't even seeing that much Gragas. I thought only maybe, like, Doran and Driver would play it, but it ended up looking pretty useful, so we'll move that up. Then in Fringe, these were champions that I thought were, like, pickable, and that we would maybe only see, like, once or something. So out of these picks, we did end up seeing Gangplank. We saw Set, we saw Warwick, Fiora, Aurelia, Mordekaiser. So we saw a fair amount of these picks one time, so I'm fine keeping all these here. All the champions that I have here that we did not see, I still think are, like, more than fine to pick. Like, Merwin could have gone Nico one time. Nasus is a Yorick potential counter pick. It's also like pretty good into Kalista, so if Kalista was a little bit stronger, maybe Nasus would have been playable. I think Riven is like pretty strong right now. We could have seen Vladimir for sure. I still think Warwick is playable, even though the one time that we saw it from Broken Blade, it did not look so hot. I'm still certain Warwick is playable. The one time we saw Fiora, it did not look amazing, but it was like fine. We got to see the Aurelia counterpick into the Yorick. Usually, okay, so when Mordekaiser was picked, it was picked as like a Yorick counter, and I don't agree with that. I think that if we were going to see Yorick, it should have been like an Ornn counterpick when like the enemy team has a Jinx or something, but we didn't end up seeing that. We actually never saw Olaf top, which I was a bit surprised about, but we did end up getting an Olaf jungle, so it's like same shit basically. It's the same idea where it's like if the enemy team ends up accidentally picking a comp that Olaf is good into, you can pick Olaf like super late into the draft and it just hard counters what they have. Singed I still think is playable, and Ryze I still think is playable top. So yeah, I would say overall this would be like the new-ish top lane tier list that I had. I thought my original read wasn't half bad. I could see some arguments here. I could see people wanting maybe like Aatrox and Gwen up to very strong, or maybe move Jax down or move Ornn down or something, but overall this is what I would have. Moving into jungle, this is what I had. So I had Vi at meta defining. Despite all of the changes that she got, I still thought that she was going to be meta defining. Then in very strong I had Nefiri, Pantheon, Trundle, and then good pick, all of these. So in my opinion, what we ended up getting was probably something like this. So Pantheon for sure was meta defining, and I think Vi was not. I thought Vi was a very, very strong pick, but not meta defining. Nefiri was a really interesting one to me because I still think Nefiri is extremely strong as a jungler. I still think she's one of the strongest junglers in the game. However, she was only picked like 3 or 4 times, and she might have lost like all of them. So in terms of overall win rate and how the champion looked, it clearly did not show up. But I'm telling you, this champion is still the champion who you can draft your entire comp around. She can still solo carry games. I would put her like here. I was impressed with Trundle's showing. I had Trundle at the back of very strong initially because I kind of thought that he would only come in as like a counter pick to when the enemy team had a Scion or an Ornn, or if the enemy jungler picked Poppy or Sejuani, or if the enemy support had a Leona or something like that. So I thought that Trundle would be more situational, but it ended up being that you could kind of pick Trundle into whatever and it was still strong, so we can move Trundle up for sure. Moving into good pick territory, I think Xin Zhao was pretty good. Xin Zhao Prio was very high, and it also looked pretty good, so we'll put that there. I'd also like move Wukong here. Maokai, I think I had in roughly the right spot. Same thing with Sejuani and Nocturne. I think maybe you can move Sejuani like above Maokai. Then for Lee Sin and Nidalee, I still think Nidalee is playable after all the buffs that she got. The times that Canyon brought it out, it did not look great, but I still think it's playable. I still don't think Skarner is that good. We never saw Kindred, but I still think Kindred is really strong in certain spots. The times that we saw Zed, it did not look good, but I still think Zed is very strong. Zed and Nefiri have a somewhat similar playstyle, I would say, like in the current pro play meta, and I think that they're both actually good. Viego I think is like good but not amazing, so I think that's fine. Then down here, I have a change I want to make. I want to move Jarvan up to like the bottom of good pick. I still have my problems with Jarvan. I think he's a champion that you can only pick in certain spots. I think if you pick him early, then the enemy team can pick champions that play around him very well. I think that Jarvan tends to be on the lower damage side, which can hurt in like early skirmishes and jungle 1v1 situations and stuff like that. So I'm not sold that Jarvan is amazing, but we certainly had some really good performances on the Jarvan. Specifically, I'm thinking about Owner. Owner's Jarvan looked really nice. And playable, so we did end up seeing a lot of these champions. We saw Zyra, Ivern. We never saw Jax. We did see the Lilia. We saw Amundo one time, I think. The Lilia ended up looking a little bit more useful than I thought it would. But again, the reason why I had it down here was because not only did it get nerfed, but it's also really only, after the nerfs, it's like only playable when the enemy team has a bunch of melee champions. And then so when we did see it, it was into a bunch of melee champions and it looked really good, but I don't think we can move Lilia up to good pick or anything. Moving down to Fringe, unfortunately, we did not get any of these. So the Kha'Zix, Diana, Fiddlesticks, Bel'Veth, Morgana, we never got any of them, but I think that they all have their place in Fringe, right? Like they all work in very specific ways. So you can go Kha'Zix when the enemy has like a Xin Zhao or something. You can go Diana if you want to pair it with Yasuo. You can, like, Fiddle got buffed, so I think he could have been playable. Bel'Veth was playable, but we didn't have like many great Bel'Veth players at the tournament. Like Elyoya is fine, but yeah, we didn't have too many like crazy Bel'Veth players here, so nobody picked it. And then Morgana is technically a Vi counter pick in the jungle. We've seen in the past that Morgana jungle can counter Vi jungle, but I guess Morgana was too weak for anybody to consider her this time around. So this would be like my new updated jungle tier list roughly. I really don't think Xin Zhao or Wukong are actually good enough to be pushed up here, but yeah, I definitely underestimated Pantheon a little bit. Pantheon was in fact the strongest jungler in this meta for sure. Moving into my mid list, this is what I had before the tournament started. So my read was that because every single meta mid laner, so the top meta mid laners heading into MSI were Talia and Azir, 100%. There was also Ahri was very strong too. So before the tournament started, in Summer Split and Playoffs, it was probably Talia, Azir 1-2, Ahri number 3, and then maybe like Annie 4 or 5. So my read was that all of these champions got nerfed, and specifically a lot of them got their lane phase hit. So Annie's biggest weakness is laning, so I was thinking she will be much more pickable because her biggest weakness is now fixed by the fact that all of the oppressive mid laners in the meta, their lane phases are now weaker, so Annie will be more present. I actually think I nailed it. I viewed putting Annie at top tier as a risk. I didn't know if this was going to happen. I just had like a gut instinct that I thought she would be super high prio, and she was. I think this is like further pushed forward by the fact that pretty much everybody who picked Annie, 90% of the games that we saw Annie in, she like, they were playing her badly and she was still winning all of her games, so that certainly tells me something. The other change I would make is that I would move Talia up. I think Talia was definitely meta defining. For sure, 100% it helps when Pantheon is the strongest jungler. It'll help out Talia because Pantheon and Talia work very well together. So it puts a lot of pressure on enemy teams to want to have to ban both. Like, you have to ban one and let through the other, or vice versa, or you gotta ban both, or you ban neither and you just lose. So it's like, both of them being strong kind of help each other out in terms of making them have more pressure in draft. Talia ended up also just being very strong on her own. I think she was one of the most banned champions. Not the most banned, not even like second most, but she was up there for sure. And very strong. I think there are some changes here for sure. Aurora was definitely stronger than I gave her credit for. She had gotten buffed, so originally I had her in good pick, and then she received a pretty fat buff, so I moved her up to very strong, but I didn't think she would go much further than that. But she was definitely really good. The Azir nerfs, you could definitely feel them, so I would have Azir there. The Ahri nerfs hit big time. I don't know, Ahri did not look great this tournament. I still think she's probably very strong. It just, people didn't really show up on her, but I would move Ahri back. I would have Ryze in front, and then I would have Aurora in front there. Maybe I could even see something like this. It could be possible, but you could have either or. In good pick, here's where things are going to get spicy off the bat. So I have Twisted Fate in good pick, and I'm going to leave him there. Twisted Fate went, I believe, 0 and 8 in this tournament. I'm keeping Twisted Fate in good pick. So like for me, the reason why Twisted Fate was losing so much was because at the start of the tournament, people had this read that Twisted Fate, because of the bus, was going to be like uber mega 100% pick or ban Giga Stomper, and he just wasn't. So people were banning him every game or first picking him if he was up. And then it's like, obviously, if you're going to first pick Twisted Fate and then not build your comp around him, you're going to lose. Like, we had a lot of games where people were like first picking Twisted Fate and then getting put into a matchup where Twisted Fate can't get push, and then 10 minutes into the game he would go on side lane and then would never actually be able to make any ultimate plays. It's like, if you're going to pick Twisted Fate, you have to pick champions around the Twisted Fate. You have to go like a Nocturne or a Lee Sin, some kind of aggressive jungler. You need to have side lanes that you can play for, so you want something like I don't know, a Camille or a Jax or a Corki, you know, something that you can actually ult into their lane and have kills set up. Like we were seeing Twisted Fate kind of slotted a lot into the same type of games that you would see a Talia or an Azir picked, and it's like, yeah, the Twisted Fate's not going to work like that. Like the times that we saw it in playoffs, like Chovy played it into Yone because that's a lane where you can actually, you know, get push and then have a positive impact in the game, and then it becomes harder for Yone to play later because Yone doesn't have a way to get into the fight without getting stunned by the gold card, stuff like that, right? So I think Twisted Fate is still very strong. I think the reason why he lost all of his games was because people were over prioritizing him at the start of the tournament and people were picking him in the wrong spots. So I still think Twisted Fate is really good. I think Orianna's good. I think Corki is fine, although he definitely was not amazing. Silas Prio was very high, and the Silas looked good. I would say that like the Galio looked really strong as well. I was not super impressed with Victor, but Victor did have his fair share of solid games, so we'll leave him up here too. Cassio had some decent looking games. Then in playable, I didn't think anybody was going to pick Lee Sin mid. I was like almost certain nobody was going to pick it, but I promise it is actually like a fine pick. And in fact, I think we might see it in summer a little bit because Duenby is still on NIP. Duenby was the guy who was kind of bringing out the Lee Sin mid. He was also playing a lot of like, well, I wouldn't say a lot, but he was playing Kled mid and stuff too. Like, I think if you want an AD mid laner, Lee Sin is certainly a fine choice. His lane phase is shockingly better than you would think. The Hui I would move up. I wouldn't change too much else here. You know, Kassadin, Asol, Zoe, Tristana. We never ended up seeing any Zoe mid games. We never saw any Ziggs mid. We only saw like one Jace mid, one Asol mid. We saw like Triss mid kind of get blown out, but it's like, I still think all these champions are like playable in the right spots, you know. Then in Fringe, so we actually did see quite a few of these. So we saw Nico mid once. We saw Syndra mid once. We never saw Yasuo. We never saw Cho'Gath. We didn't get the Renekton flex, but I still think that's possible. We didn't get a Zed like flex, but I also think that's possible. We saw LeBlanc once, we saw Zillion once. Neither of them looked amazing. LeBlanc, or not LeBlanc, Lysandra I still have here because she plays very similarly to Annie, and it just so happens that LeBlanc's lane phase, or not, oh my god, I keep on saying LeBlanc. Lysandra's lane phase is just a little bit too weak right now, but she serves a similar role to Annie. So I think if Annie is out and you really wanted to play something that you could pair with an AD fighter, Lysandra's probably like still a fringe pickable champion. Yeah, this would be my mid lane list here. Then for bot lane, I initially had Ezreal, Kalista, Kai'Sa, Varus as my picks for very strong. And the reason why I had Varus at the back was because heading into MSI, he received a really large buff. He got his armor shot down by 3. Or sorry, I don't know why I said buff. He got a really large nerf. He got his armor shot down by 3. It was 27. It got brought down to 24. I looked at that. I was like, damn, that's like a pretty big nerf. I made the decision to keep him in very strong because Varus tends to be a longer range champion. So in an ideal world, the armor wouldn't actually matter that much because you shouldn't really be in range to get hit that much. But I was thinking, you know, Varus, 3 armor is a lot of armor early. He probably won't be the strong. Yeah, no, he was the strongest champion. He was 100% he was the strongest marksman still. Turns out lane dominant 2v2s was still the meta. That said, the one lane dominant 2v2 champion that did not end up looking that great was Kalista. She went, I believe, 0-10. That said, I am leaving her in good pick. Like, I'll move her down, but I don't think she's that bad, and I'll tell you why. Because people were still trying to play her early. Like, people at the start of the tournament were still picking her in early drafts. They were still prioritizing her in first 3, and it looked really bad. Kalista's lane phase definitely got hit. The way that you would want to play her in this meta is that you would want to wait until the champions, Ezreal, Varus, Nico, Karma, these types of champions, you'd want to wait for them to all be out, and then you would go Kalista in like a game 4 or game 5 situation, and then you'll have a lot more success. And we actually did see that one time. We saw Gen G pick Kalista, and they should have won that game, but Canyon threw that game really hard. So like that's a situation where they picked Kalista late into a series and it looked really good and they should have won, and then they just didn't because of something that was absolutely not Kalista's fault. So I think Kalista's still fine. I just think that teams were heavily over prioritizing her, and then she lost so much that teams just like got too scared to try her again. Caitlyn ended up, I had a read that I thought that Caitlyn and Draven Prio would go up. They did. We saw the Draven one time, we saw Caitlyn multiple times. They looked really good. Same thing with Ashe. We saw Ashe a lot. I thought that Ashe looked really good. I would move like Jinx probably above Kalista. I really don't think Jinx was that amazing. Like she came out a few times and she won most of the games that she played and had really good score lines, but there's this like sentiment in the community that Jinx is somehow like really strong actually and could be pick or ban, and you can play her early and fearless. It's like 100% you cannot. Like if you pick Jinx into a Varus lane, or if you pick Jinx into an Ezreal Karma or an Ashe Seraphine or a Caitlyn lane, like you're gonna get destroyed. I'm telling you, like, you are not going to survive that lane. But yeah, for sure Jinx is a really strong pick late and fearless. I would move her up. Jhin ended up also being very solid. He was used as kind of like a lane neutralizer as expected, but he ended up looking pretty good. Sivir was fine. We saw Zeri once, it was fine. Misfortune did not look good. So this is the other thing I would do, is I would actually move Corki up to like the top of good pick, and then I would also move Lucian up. Corki and Lucian ended up both showing up a lot bigger than I thought they would. Now, granted, we did get some of the better Lucian players, like the better Lucian ADCs at this tournament. You know, Guma, Elk, Hope, these players are all known for having a very solid Lucian, so it makes sense. Ruler too. And then we also had like a lot of good Corki players at this tournament. So like Hope and Guma were both very good Corki players. So we saw the rise of these two champions. I definitely underestimated their potential strength, so we can move those up for sure. And then I'm keeping Misfortune and Xayah down here. I was not impressed with how either of them looked. In playable, I had Aphelios, Tristana, Ziggs. I think this is about right. I think if anything, maybe Ziggs could go here, but I'm leaving all these here. And then in Fringe, we never saw the Samira, but we did see Yasuo and Neela, and they both, you know, they looked about how I expected they would look within their respective games. They're both champions that you can pick sometimes, but it needs to be the right spot. For Neela, we saw it get picked in a spot where Neela was really good and then it won. And then for Yasuo, we saw it maybe get picked in a spot that wasn't so good for it, and it like looked okay and then lost. So this would be my new bot lane tier list after the tournament. And then finally we have support. Originally I had Nico in meta defining supports. Then she got hit with a 20 damage nerf to her Q, base damage. And then, so I moved her down to the top of very strong, thinking she would still be the strongest support in the game, even after the nerf. Nico, I think, actually probably was still the strongest support in the game after the nerf, but she was by no means meta-defining. She was not a champion that you could, like, insta-slam whenever you wanted. You had to actually be more careful about when you picked Nico now, but yeah, Nico first, I'm still fine with. Braum second, I'm still fine with. Rel, Nautilus, Alistar are all fine. Turns out, Renata maybe not so useful when you don't have Callista there. Like, obviously, so the Callista-Renata combo, the reason why it's so strong is because you put the bailout on Callista. Callista can continue throwing spears into people until after she's already dead, she can keep on throwing spears. So she gets a bunch more spears, then she can press E, execute the target, get the revive, whatever, so it's just a strong combo. So we saw Renata get a lot of her losses with Callista. We did see her win a game off of Callista where she looked good, but I don't think she was like a very strong type of good. I would move Karma up. Karma ended up being more useful paired with more things than just Ezreal. I thought she was only going to be picked with Ezreal. She was picked with more things and ended up looking pretty solid in all the games she was picked. So I would have Karma in very strong. And we have, let's see, I put Rakan here. Leona, I think, is in roughly the right spot. I still think Elise support is very underrated. The times that we did see it, it looked good. I think that Elite support is still super strong if you know what you're doing, but just a lot of people don't know what they're doing with the champion because it's a very new support. Bard, we saw look very impressive in certain games. I think, usually the train of thought with Bard is that you pick it into a mobile champions, right? So you would pick it into, I don't know, Ryze, Orianna. You could pick it into Victor, Talia maybe even. You could pick it into Varus or Ashe or Caitlyn. And then it's like you would never want to pick it into champions like Ezreal or Kai'Sa or Aurora or Azir or Ahri. And it's like these champions I all thought were going to be pretty playable, so I thought that Bard would be kind of a niche pick that you could pick into some comps and not others. The thing that I kind of underestimated is that I forgot how useful Bard was going to look into champions like engage supports. Like the Rel showed up a lot. We had like a lot of Vi and stuff. And the Bard, I forgot how good Bard can be as like a counter engage tool. Well, I wouldn't say forget, but I would just say like I underestimated how good Bard could be as a counter engage tool in this meta. So I would move the Bard up a bit. I think Bard was more useful than I thought it was going to be. I'll also put Poppy like there, maybe. And then the last change I would put here is that I would actually... no, I'll leave Seraphine at the top of playable. I thought that Seraphine was only going to come out with Ashe. She also ended up coming out with some other champions, and she was never really the problem in her losses, I think. I thought that Seraphine looked good, but not good enough that I'd move her up to good pick. We never saw Ashe support. I was thinking maybe we would see more Varus Ashe or something, but you know, we didn't get that at all. The Blitzcrank looked fine when it came out. Milio and Nami, you know, you only pair those with certain champions. Neither of them ended up really mattering that much. We never saw Lux. We saw Shen a few times. It was underwhelming. Then we get into Fringe. These are champions that I had down here. I would say that like maybe the one change I would make is move Tahm Kench up to playable. Turns out, I thought that Tahm Kench's lane phase would be a little bit too weak right now, but he was still being used to protect hyper carries when they were picked, and it looked fine, so I could move Kench up. The Pyke is an interesting one for me. We saw it twice. One time, Keria played it and looked really good on it, and then lost the game anyway, and then the other time, Duro played it and he looked not so great on it, and then he won anyway, so it's like, who knows, but the Pyke is really only an option when every other engaged support is down. So, like, for example, we saw, like, Genji kind of had a panic moment in Game 5 of Grand Finals, where they locked in Miss Fortune on 4, but then Nautilus, Rel, Alistar, Rakan, Poppy, and Leona were all either, and Blitzcrank, they were all either out or banned, and then so they had, like, no engage options left, and they were like, oh man, we really need engage to help set up our team comp, so they just went Pyke, and I thought their draft was terrible, and then they won anyway, so... you know, whatever. But yeah, so I mean, I can move Pyke like up for sure, but I don't think Pyke it could be put into like playable tier or anything. I think he's still Fringe. So yeah, this would be my support list. So this is my draft mate read before and after the tournament. I think overall I got it pretty accurate. There were a couple of calls that I made that I thought champions would either be like stronger or weaker, or the meta would shift before and after the MSI patches that I got right for sure. Like Annie Prio going up, I got right, and then Caitlyn Prio going up, I also got right, so I'm pretty happy with that. There were also some big misses for me. I thought Callista would still be super strong, she was not. I thought Varus would drop in Prio a little bit, he did not. So yeah, This is my new top list, new jungle list, new mid list, new bot list, new support list. Okay. With that, my content for MSI 2025 comes to a close. I'll share my pick'ems real quick for the people who keep asking. The official ones were kind of bare bones and stupid, so I did the dpm.lol pick'ems instead, and here they are. I thought we would get one randomly short game like most tournaments, but we did not, and I thought we would get 3+ pentakills because we usually do. I chose Infernal Drake because it's the easiest to kill. I would never pick Mountain or Ocean because Mountain is tankier, and Ocean has the annoying slow on hit, so I thought subconsciously this would make junglers want to not take those as frequently. At the end of the day though, Dragons is basically luck. I had 7 or more best of 5s because in a tournament with 19, I figured a lot of the series later on with the West vs West and East vs East would go the distance, and I had more than 8 first bloods before 3 minutes because the champions in the meta, especially bot and jungle, are very geared towards early playmaking. For champions, I was hoping Merwin would have 1 game of Nico top, and despite the fact that Talia did not get on the leaderboard, I'm not upset with that choice. I still think Nefaria is strong even though I don't think it hit 5 games, and Zeri obviously only had the 1 sadly. For players, I went with a lot of AL. If a team loses early and then wins their way through lower bracket, they play 5 series instead of 4, so I thought AL would be the team to do this. Unfortunately, they lost in lower bracket finals, so they only got 4 series just like everyone else. I still got a reasonable amount of points from players and teams though. Finally, I got points for both no wins and overall win. My pick'ems were pretty decent I would say, but nothing special. That's all I have for you this time. In terms of upcoming content, I'm thinking about posting something along the lines of top 15 best players in the world for each role heading into Summer Split, so let me know if that sounds interesting to you all. I'll also probably do team power rankings for Summer Split either here or on my second channel, once we get all of the roster change confirmations. Apart from that, there's not much else esports related from me until we get to either playoffs or worlds, unless I get LCP co-streaming rights or something. I'll see you all next time. Bye!